Be starting in 1 second, just getting Instagram going. All right. Looks like we're going. Okay. Welcome to Notable Approvals. I am Attorney Amanda Shaffer. I just finished some virtual court. Excited to talk about what happened today. Before I get to our case, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you are watching. If you find this video helpful or know someone who may, go ahead, click that share button, save button, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. And if you actually now, I forgot, on all three platforms, if you or someone you know need help with their case, our contact information is scrolling across the bottom of your screen. Okay. So I am super excited to talk about this case today. This is definitely what I would consider a marathon case. This client has been in removal proceedings for 17 years. 17 years, almost 17 years. I'm sorry, almost 16 years. Yeah, it was 2008, not 2007. So this client has been waiting a very long time, and he just had bad luck after bad luck. So let's get into the case a little. This client, he's residing in the Bronx and has been for a very long time. He's a native and citizen of the country of Mali. He first entered the U.S. at the end of 2002 with a B2 visitor visa. He was 16 years old. He came here with a group of teenagers that were coming, basically on a trip to see the U.S. There was 2 chaperones. He wasn't here with his parents or anything. And then the person in charge of the group, they were slated to go back about 4 or 5 days later at the beginning of 2003. And none of the kids went back, but the person in charge of the group took everyone's passports when they got off the plane and went through customs and held on to them. And then when he was leaving, he said, "I need to bring the passports back with me." So he took all the kids' passports back with him. And my client asked him, why? And he's like, "Well, I got to bring it back. I'll give it to your mom." These are kids. They don't really know. And this is a good note for anyone watching out there. If you go to any country that is not your own, and no matter how old you are, if somebody takes your passport, hold on to your passport yourself. Now, obviously you can give it to someone for safekeeping, but you should never let anyone take your passport out of the country. You do not want what happened in this case to happen to you. So what ended up happening was he needed the passport a few months later because he wanted to go to school. So his mom had to go get it. So she went to this guy that took the passport back and said, finally there was some back and forth. He was kind of sketchy about it. She finally got it. And I forgot if she mailed it or she sent a lot of times what people would do is send, if they knew someone traveling to the US, they'd give them it and the passport or whatever they needed to get to the US. They'd give it to them. They'd take it with them and then give it to the person when they got here. So the client gets a passport back, doesn't think doesn't even look through it, just make sure it's his, which it is. So, everything's going along fine in his life. And then he marries a U.S. citizen. And this was in, I think, 2007 he got married. And she files for him to get a green card. They go to the interview at USCIS. He brings his passport, which you're supposed to. You have to, you send in a copy of your entry stamp to show you lawfully entered. But then you have to bring the actual passport. So he brings the actual passport, gives it to USCIS officer. They look through. And all the way towards the back of his passport book, they see a stamp that he arrived in Bamako in Mali on January 4th, 2003. And there's no other stamp showing that he came back to the U.S. on this visa. So they say that, so they end up denying his green card application. saying that he departed the U.S. and illegally re-entered because he doesn't have proof of his entry. And then what happened was that they put him into removal proceeding. They issued a notice to appear. And they said that the reason he was in removal proceedings was because he entered the country illegally. So I'm not I wasn't back in 2009. I was in my last year of college. I wasn't a lawyer yet. So I don't know what happened, but he got removed in absentia, which means he didn't show up to court. But shortly after that, and that was in 2009, shortly after that, the immigration judge reopened his case. So that happened pretty quickly. He had things deteriorated with his relationship with his wife. They divorced. He then remarried a U.S. citizen, another U.S. citizen, and she filed a new marriage petition or I-130 for him in 2011. That got approved. Once that got approved, his old attorney filed a motion to dismiss the removal proceedings. Now, this is where I'm going to circle back to that decision in a second because things get a little interesting with that decision in and of itself. So, and you're going to have to follow me here because this case gets a little confusing. So the case gets reopened again by the judge in 2014. Oh, sorry, the green card was refiled. The judge terminated the proceedings in 2011 to allow him to get his green card with USCIS, but then the green card got denied for the same reason in 2014. Then that attorney files a second motion to reopen. Good morning, Tanya. Thank you for joining us. You're going to like this case, I promise you. So the judge reopens the case again. And then this is when we get hired, shortly after that. This is very true, Tanya. The goat is here. So what happens is hires us to go to court with him. We do a substitution of counsel. Everything's fine. We know that we have this reentry issue. So in 2019, before COVID, we have our individual hearing scheduled. So we get all this evidence to prove we know that there's this one issue. Did he leave the country and then illegally reenter? But did he depart? He says, I didn't depart. I haven't left since I got here. He's been completely consistent the whole time. In fact, he had a group of like 14 people with him. Every single one of them now have green cards or are citizens. And they also had that stamp in their passport. But someone didn't see it. They got lucky. He didn't get lucky. So we have witnesses arrive in court that day because back in 2019, there was no such thing as virtual court. So he had people actually fly here from other parts of the country. Like it was someone who was on the trip with him, his cousin who he stayed with when he got here. And then someone else that he might have gone to school with when he got here who knew him during this whole time period to testify that no, he didn't leave. We got an affidavit from his mom explaining how she got the passport and then she sent it here. You know, we felt pretty good about the evidence we had because at the end of the day, it's been so long since 2003 that it was going to come down to credibility regardless. And I knew my client was going to be found credible. So we get to court that day, and I'll never forget this day because his wife and these three witnesses are sitting in the waiting room. I go in, and the attorney for the government says, we have a problem. And I was like, what? She's like, it was improper for the immigration judge to reopen his case in 2014. Or when I think it was 2014. It might have been 2016 when they actually reopened it. I don't remember the exact date. But there was the second reopening. It was improper. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, we've been in this courtroom since the reopening, like 5 times. It was first with the old attorneys, then with us. No one has brought up this issue. Where are you getting this from? Her whole argument was this is a very technical procedural argument that I'm not going to get into. I'll just give you the broad overview of it. Basically, they were saying that once your removal proceedings are terminated, then an only way to reopen them or to go back in front of the judge is for the Department of Homeland Security to issue a new notice to appear and put you back into removal proceedings. I actually don't think she was technically correct there. I ended up having to oppose this motion in 2019 or 2020. I don't remember all the details, but essentially what ended up happening was we sat there, and like I said, I'll never forget this date. We were wondering, why did the judge terminate the proceedings for him to go? Because I should mention this: the judge who terminated his proceedings in the past was now retired, so it's a new judge handling the case. So she didn't know what happened, and all we were like wondering was, why would the judge dismiss his case if he didn't have, without deciding about his entry, because there was no decision about his entry or departure, alleged departure. Why would they do that, knowing that USCIS is going to have the same problem, deny it again, and he's going to be right back where he started? And so no one knew because no one was there. So I ended up sitting in court listening to the hearing tapes because they do record every hearing. And so it was me, the judge, and the trial attorney for the government, just the three of us, sat there for hours listening. And it was, and I've listened to these tapes before for other cases, but I've never done it with the judge and the trial attorney. And it was really strange because you hear the judge telling his old attorney, you need to bring more proof about his entry. You need to bring more proof. And then he doesn't bring in the proof. And then the judge goes, so what do you want me to do? And he says, I want you to dismiss the case. And the judge says, well, you know that USCIS is just going to deny this. You'll end up right back here. And he goes, yes, we want the case dismissed. So this was back when, this was 2016, because this is when Obama was president still, and they were dismissing, kind of similar to what's happening now, where a lot of cases are being dismissed. Cases are being dismissed pretty easily. This was not a case that should have been dismissed, though, because of this issue. So they dismissed the case, and of course, it ended up back here. So I'm sitting here listening to these recordings because we wanted to find out really what happened, and the judge was asking DHS to cite, case law about her. She was calling it, she wanted to rescind the motion to reopen. I will also say that DHS filed a non-opposition, saying that we don't oppose reopening his case when they reopened it in 2016. I just said that they were dismissing it in 2016. They were doing that too. But when they reopened in 2016, they filed a non-opposition and then never brought up an issue. We're on date of trial, all of a sudden issue. So I'm like, this is silly. You can't even cite law to show you, to say that you're correct here, that it shouldn't have been reopened, rescinded. You waited, at this point, it had been 3 years to say anything. We've been in court a number of times. And so then DHS, so I'm listening to these tapes, going back and forth to my client outside, being like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we're trying to figure this out. They're bringing up this argument that I don't even know what the purpose is, because if DHS succeeded, all what that would have happened is my client's case would have been dismissed. He wouldn't have been in removal proceedings. He would have just been here without lawful status. So I was like, I feel like they think they're going to lose, because if we were to proceed with the testimony and the judge found my client credible, they'd give him a green card. If not, they would give him a deportation order. And why wouldn't DHS, now we're in 2019, which is when Trump is in office, and they're really pushing to deport people. So why wouldn't they want to deport him? And why would they want him to stay here without lawful status? It didn't make any sense. And my client, understandably, and his wife, And the witnesses were all confused and looking at me like, what's going on? I couldn't even let them in the room to hear what was going on. I just had to keep going on and explaining it. So DHS then says they want time to file a motion to rescind the motion to reopen grant. And of course, I vehemently objected. But the judge, as is common with immigration court, the judge decided to let her brief it because if she didn't, DHS would definitely appeal the decision if they lost. I think they'd still lose, but there wasn't anything I could do to stop it other than trying to object. So the judge gave her a deadline of when she had to submit the motion, and I do remember also that we didn't get the motion on time. Again, doesn't seem to matter so much for DHS. Then I got to submit an opposition, which I did. And then finally, the judge in 2020 denied DHS's motion and scheduled us again for an individual hearing, which is the merits hearing or the trial. So then COVID happens and the court's close. And then my client's court date, which was like, I think going to be in March of 2020, got moved like 3 times. At one point, we get a notice that they scheduled him for a master calendar hearing, which is not the trial, which is the conference, like the first hearing you have. And I was just like, oh my God. Like why are they doing this? They didn't switch judges, which I was like, people were getting switched judges left and right. And that's why that was happening a lot. It wasn't that. That wasn't the reason. We don't know. It was just a mistake. So I had to write a letter to the judge and then they switched it back. It was like very confusing. And then, kind of leading up to today, we were like constantly checking to make sure his date wasn't changed again because this poor guy has just been waiting forever, even though he did nothing wrong. So we finally get to today, and let me say before we get to today what I did. So after that hearing in 2019, I was like, okay, what we had from him was his immunization records. That the first stamp date in there was the end of 2003. So we had to show that he was in the US on a specific date, January 4th, 2003, and January 3rd, 2003. Showing a specific date, especially when you're 16 years old and it's been how many years at that point? I can't do math. 16 years at that point. That's kind of hard. You're not necessarily going to have anything to show because he couldn't start school right away because he didn't have his passport. We did put in his school record showing in 2014 he started. I was like, we had witnesses who were with him and stuff, and we were racking our brains like, what else? What else can we give to this court to show that you were here? So I was like, what we have to do is like, one thing that DHS didn't give us was the I-94 record. The I-94 is your arrival departure record. It's supposed to show every arrival. You get it for each arrival. And it used to be back then you would get a piece of paper. And you would fill it in when you came into the country. And then when you left, you would give it to immigration on your departure. Now it's electronic, but one of DHS did submit documents in this case. They submitted the passport stamp, but they did not submit the I-94 record, which you would think they should have had a copy of if they had collected it. So I was like, this is what we have to do. Let's do a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request. Now, there's different types of FOIA requests you can do. The typical one in immigration is with USCIS. You do general FOIA. You get the entire immigration record. But those records sometimes don't have specifics about your entry and exit. So you have to file a FOIA with CBP or Custom and Border Patrol because they're the ones who actually keep track of you coming in and out of the country. So we did both. And when I was going through the first FOIA file, and these are like thousands of pages, I found some of the government like printouts that show different records. So they'll show this one was called I don't even know the system. They have some internal system where they record information about you. And on that piece of paper, you had handwritten notes where they circled they circled it and said he departed, no proof of reentry. And I looked at the flight, and it actually has the flight information too, the date, the flight, everything. It says that he left on January 3rd on Egypt Air, and it gives me the flight number. Now I'm like, wait, has Egypt Air has it ever flown to Mali? Like that? I let me see. So I went online and I couldn't find any flights from Egypt Air going to Mali. So I was like, and then I was able to actually find that that exact flight only goes to Cairo. So then I was like, okay, well, how far is Cairo from Bamako? Well, turns out it's pretty damn far. It's like, I think 17 hours. It was minimum of 12 hours. I don't remember. It was a long flight. So I was like, okay, well, if he flew to Cairo on the 3rd, he would have had to fly to Bamako on the 3rd to get there on the 4th, or fly from Cairo to Bamako on the 4th to get there on the 4th. Technically, could have been the same day too. I wonder if there are any flights from Cairo to Bamako, either on the 3rd or the 4th. So I went digging, and there's a flight records started in a lot of places that you could go back as far as you could go back, like 2004. So I was like, so I reached out to this company called OAG, and for the life of me, can't remember what OAG stands for. But I'm looking at it now. It is. No, not getting what that stands for, but it's something like where they provide analytics for all the airlines. They keep really good tracks of everything, and their records went back to 2004. So I contacted them directly, and I was like, can you tell me if there was this flight, like where this flight went, and if it was possible, if there was a flight from Cairo to Bamako on the 3rd or the 4th. And the person wrote back to me and said, I have not been able to identify any flights from Cairo to Bamako during that time period. It's like, okay, that's good for us. And I'm like, well, what else can we show? So then we get the FOIA back from Custom and Border Patrol. And in that request to CBP, it says, what are you asking for? And tells you to ask as specifically as possible. So I said, I'm looking for my client's departure from JFK to Cairo on this date, on this flight number. I want any information about this or any other departure that he may have. So I submitted that, and then a few months later, I get back we've granted your request in full. Here are our records. And the records was 1 page. So record would be more appropriate. 1 page. And all it had on that page at the very top was information about my client's entry. The passport number, where he entered, the date he entered, and the flight he took. Nothing about departures. So I was like, well, if they were going to have anything, it should be here. Because one of the issues that we had to get by was, how does DHS have in their system that my client left the country, but he didn't actually leave? So I felt pretty good with this evidence. I submitted all, and then we get there today. And, I reached out to the trial attorney before. I said, are there any, issues, any other issues here? And they're like, no, it's just the entry. Our position is still that there's a departure stamp. So, we appreciate the effort not the departure stamp, the arrival stamp in Mali. We appreciate the effort you went to try to prove that he didn't, but that's going to be our position. It'll be up to the judge. So it's like, okay, I understand. So today we our witnesses are having technical difficulties logging into the WebEx. So the judge said, have them stand by. So my client starts to testify. I ask him all the questions, when did you enter? Did you ever depart? where were you on this date? How did you get the passport stamp? And he explains the whole thing. Consistent with the affidavit we submitted, consistent with what he said in every other sworn interview that he's had. I didn't leave. I gave my passport to this guy. My mom got it from him. She sent it to me. And if you're wondering, why would this guy get a stamp in his passport? What would be the purpose? Well, we know why, or unofficially know why. So this guy used to take groups of kids, maybe adults too, to the U.S. for vacations, and he was responsible. He basically filed for their visas, and he did everything. So when he goes back to the country, when he goes to bring another group here, if he couldn't prove that all the kids came back, they weren't going to let him take another group here. So that's why he had to get stamps in everyone's passport, so he could say, look, all the kids came back. Now I want to bring this new group. That's what we ended up learning about why he got it. But without him testifying, you can't really bring that evidence in, because it's hearsay, and certain hearsay in immigration court is allowed, but that's a little attenuated. So I don't think that would have flown. So basically, I go through all those questions, and then the judge says to me, and this is again one thing that's different between immigration court and non-immigration court, or non-administrative court. Normally, when you submit evidence, it won't get admitted unless you introduce it through a witness. In immigration court, they kind of just go through it at the beginning if DHS objects or not. So everything was admitted, and the judge asked me to explain what I had given her. So I explained what length we went to get proof that there wasn't a flight on that date, that it was impossible for him to have arrived in Bamako on January 4th. So I explained the FOIA request, the FOIA response, and who I was having that conversation with at OAG, and who they were, about if there was an Egyptian Air flight on the 3rd or 4th to Bamako. So I go through all of that with the judge, and then she's like, okay. She asked DHS again what their stance is, and they're like, still we're going to object, but we don't need to hear any testimony. They didn't ask him one question. I asked all the questions. The judge asked a few. So then the judge goes, all right, why don't we get the cousin on to testify? This was the cousin who my client lived with, like, immediately upon coming into the U.S. So he starts trying to log into the WebEx, and he's still having problems. And it's hard when the person's not with me for me to really tell them. So they were about to have him call in. And the judge goes, I got to say, I believe the respondent. I believe him that he didn't leave. And I forgot one other issue that she found was in his transcript for school. Some of the dates of the classes were in 2002, before he came to the U.S. And she's like, how did you take classes in 2002 if you weren't here? And it turns out that he took those classes in Mali. They actually transferred them and gave him credit for it. So fortunately, when you looked at the transcript, it said CR instead of a grade for those specific class, only for the ones that were before his arrival in the U.S. So we almost had to go to the Department of Education and get an explanation for that. I was like, please no. I was like praying, because it just would have delayed the case longer. So I was expecting the judge to be like, look, I just want to get clarification on that or something. And we'll come back and the witness can testify. That's what I thought was going to happen today at the end. And then the judge goes, so, I do believe the respondent. I believe that he didn't leave the country. He's been very credible. I could tell he was, trying to figure out, it's been a while, like when he started school, when he did this, but he was very clear that there was no question these classes he took back there. And so she's like, I don't need to hear from the witness. And here I have my client's phone with the witness, me trying to instruct him. And I'm like, just hold on, hold on. And then I'm like, we're good, we don't need you. And then the judge goes, I'm going to grant the application. And I was just like, oh, thank God. This is finally over for this sweet man and his wife who, I've now known since I think 2017, which is a long time, and they've just been waiting and waiting, and I gotta say, they've been super patient despite how stressful it's been. I know how hard it is for people when these cases just get rescheduled and you don't know why. But at the end of the day, as I tell my clients literally before every trial, I say, and I tell them this throughout their cases, that the truth comes out. If you're being honest, it's going to be fine. You're going to get your case approved. And that's exactly what happened here. My client was honest. He never left the country. And it was funny because, like I said, like one of the witnesses that were testifying literally was showing that he had the same stamp. And the difference is that the officer that interviewed him at USCIS for the green card must have either, when they flipped through his passport, just didn't see it because it was on page like 31. Like, you can have a passport stamp on any page. It doesn't have to go in order, but usually you see them kind of close to one another. So this was just kind of awful, in that sense too. But at the end of the day, like I said, it came down to my client being credible and the fact that we did make so much of an effort to prove that he didn't depart. Like, we did not just rest on getting an immunization record showing at the end of 2003 he got a shot. Yeah, okay, maybe he got back here by then. That's the question. On Instagram, someone's asking how much joint sponsor need to file tax if you're supposed to sponsor for 5 people. Well, we're not talking about joint sponsors today, but if you reach out to me, you could send me a message or send me an email. I can help you there. You can also Google that question. That's an easy one. I don't know the number off the top of my head, though. But point is, be honest, stick to your guns. If you, no matter what the government says, if you know something is true, you got to stick with it and you got to do your best to back it up. And it took a lot of work on my part as well, because I believe the client, and it's also very rare for someone who has it. He had a valid visa in his passport. So if he came, it was clear he had to have come back in 2003 or at least early 2004 because he started school. So for that to happen, he would have had another entry stamp, but why would he not use the visa? That doesn't make sense. So I really did believe him. And the hardest part of this case ended up being the wait, to be honest, at the end of the day. But the reason that was the hardest is because we were able to get all the other stuff and to the satisfaction of the judge. And then DHS did waive appeal, so the decision is final. That means my client should have his green card within 60 days, give or take. Hopefully, there's no issues with that. I mean, there shouldn't be. If it is, it's a processing issue on their end. But in 3 years, as long as he and his U.S. citizen wife, who have now been married for 13 years, so I'm pretty confident they will still be married and living together in 3 years, he'll be eligible for citizenship. And this was really a really heartfelt win today, because I know, like, his wife said to me, I haven't slept since our last hearing. And I was like, I believe you. This is stressful. And, I said to them, it fundamentally bothered me the way DHS acted with this case, how they waited 3 years to change their mind, their entire position about the case being reopened, and then we got the bad luck with COVID. So it was just like like one thing after another, and it can really be discouraging. But I hope anyone watching this sees that you got to just hang in there. and eventually, things work out the way they're supposed to. So, like I said, there's a lot in this case, but the bottom line here was there was one issue only, just to sum up for everyone. And that issue was, did he depart the US and illegally re-enter? The departure was based on an arrival stamp in his home country a few days after his entry into the US, and the fact that he still had the passport. But we were able to prove that his passport was taken from him, it was stamped, and then his mother mailed it or sent it to him through a person when he needed it for school. And that, combined with a lot of hard work to show that the flight he allegedly took couldn't have been the flight he took, because he could not have arrived in Bamako the day that he had that arrival stamp. Long case, long time, but like I said, at the end of the day, what matters is this client finally is a permanent resident. So let me just, there we go, get my little screen up there. That's all for today. Don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you're watching. Leave us a comment if you liked what you saw. If you had any questions, our contact information is scrolling across the bottom of your screen. You also can shoot us a message, a DM. I'd say better to call or email, but I do check that as well. And if you found this video to be helpful, or know someone who may, go ahead, click that share button or that save button. And again, leave us a comment. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. And of course, you can leave your congratulations for the client as well. That is all for today. I am going to go breathe a sigh of relief now, have some lunch, enjoy the win for a little, and then get back to some hard work. Thanks all for watching, and have a great day.